Today's podcast is brought to you by Star Local Media. 14 newspapers and websites with a print distribution of 270,000 homes and monthly page views of 600,000 online. Star Local Media, your community voice for news. Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Bryan Murphy, Kendrick Johnson, and Devin Hasson. Gentlemen, it is Thursday. We're going to pick up where we left off on Monday, continue our mid-season discussion for high school boys basketball. We have reached the midpoint in district play for the majority of our districts, so let's size up what we've seen through the first half and what potentially could be happening down the road as we get closer and closer to the playoffs. We discussed some 6A action on Monday, going to shift gears and talk some 5A today, dip our toes in 4A in the private schools. So let's start over in 5A. Let's go in reverse order of our five Class 5A districts, and let's start over in 13-5A, aka the Lancaster district.
The Lancaster district.
And it has certainly been very much that up to the midpoint. As of right now, the standings heading into Friday's ball games, you have the aforementioned Lancaster Tigers, the number one ranked team in all of 5A. They are in first place at 7-0. In second place, you have Kaufman at 5-1. In third place is Mesquite Poteet at 5-2. West Mesquite right on their heels in fourth place. They are 3-4. Then you have a tie for fifth place between the two Forney schools, North Forney and Forney High at 2-5. And then in last place at 0-7 is Terrell. Devin, where do you want to start? Whether it is just outlining the outlandish dominance of Lancaster or talking about the two Mesquite schools, man, the floor is yours.
Well, Lancaster, and this is no disrespect from the other team when you call it Lancaster's district, because that's just how it's viewed. I mean, they're the number one team in 5A for a reason.
Whatever district they're in is always going to be Lancaster's district in boys basketball.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter where you put them. I mean, you listen, they lost two of their first three games of the year. One to number one Duncanville in a close game. They lost to Prolific Prep of Napa, California, which is in the top 20. Prep. Yeah, which is an academy and is a top 20 national team. Since then, they won 24 in a row. All by double digits except for two, and that was against Dickinson in overtime, who's the number two team in 6A, and St. Mark's, who's the number two team in private schools. But both of those were rematches of games that they'd won in blowouts the prior week, so you wonder if that had anything to do with it. They've kind of taken it a step further, unfortunately, for their 13-5A mates. They're averaging 93.9 points per game in district play. They're winning by an average margin of 41.1 points. And the closest game they played has been 33 points. And it's just, they just have such a wealth of talent. You look at Mike Miles, the TCU commit, Marco Foster, another senior, Wade Taylor, one of the most highly, rated juniors. And that's just their top trio. Their depth, though, is unmatched, not just for these other district teams, but for really any 5A team in the state. Mm-hmm. So, it is, Lancaster has been the focal point in terms of considering the state picture. Outside of Lancaster, this is actually a pretty fun district. I mean, you've got a lot of solid teams that are kind of been going back and forth. Kaufman's kind of in the driver's seat there to take that second seed at 5-1. But it's been close. I mean, they beat West Mesquite by 3. They beat Poteet in overtime last Friday. Mm-hmm. But Kaufman did, they got some nice players, from what I've seen, Joseph and Jamar McCray. They have a nice sophomore in Dalen Dickerson, but they don't seem to have the depth that maybe some of these other teams like Poteet and West Mesquite have, which could play a factor as you get into the second half of the district slate. Poteet and West Mesquite, obviously my two teams are right there in the thick of things. If the season ended today, they're both back in the playoffs. That hasn't happened since, I believe, 2016, with both the MISD teams making it in the same year. For Poteet, it's been a different guy every night. Javante Valdez scored 23 on Tuesday in a victory. Shoots 9 of 13 from the floor, makes 5 3-pointers. I think he'd had single digits in his previous 4 games. Mm-hmm. It's like I say, it's just Tyler Jones, Jalen Police, Jalen Alexander in the backcourt. They got some forwards with Charles Brown, who almost had a double-double the other night, King Moore, Malcolm Vernon. There's different guys that they get scoring from on different nights. And I think Tyler Jones, he was kind of one of their leaders last year in last year's playoff teams, and he's the go-to guy if you want to say you have a go-to guy. But again, they spread the court really well, spread that offense around. West Mesquite's kind of in a similar boat. They're sitting at 3-4, and you look at that and say, wow, it's 3-4 is not great, but they just started the second half of district play and already have Lancaster out of the way. So 2 of their 4 losses are to Lancaster. They don't have to worry about them. And again, I mentioned the loss to Coffin by 3. That was a game that could have gone either way. They lost to Poteet by 6. So they were right there to turn that around in the second half of the season. Eli Huey has kind of been their main scorer. But again, like Poteet, it's been kind of by committee. Iron Hawkins, Josh Bennett, A.J. Reimers. You look at their roster, and they have basically 13 seniors out of 14 players. And they go, Todd Brewer's traditionally gone 8, 9, 10 deep, especially when they like to push the issue, turn up the pressure, force the tempo. So they're in a good position. North Forney and Forney are right on their heels, 1 game back. But if you look back at the first half of the district season, they beat North Forney by 20, and they beat Forney by 13. So, I think they proved during that time that they're the better team. Mm-hmm. Now, anything can happen in terms of upsets and whatnot, but I think the top 4 that you're looking at right now is probably the top 4 you're looking at the end of the season. Number 1 is pretty much a foregone conclusion, but I think there can be a lot of changes in those 2 through 4.
Okay. Let's see. Then over in District 11 5A, you've got another district that's being ruled by one team, and what's certainly been one of the more impressive stories just around the Metroplex, and that is the year of Newman Smith, the Trojans. They are still undefeated. We are now down to what? There's 6 games left in the season, and Newman Smith still has a perfect circle.
I guess because I actually saw the.
Listen.
I saw the foundation.
Well, I get it, but any team that's undefeated this deep into the season, there's 4 teams in the entire state that can say that right now, and no matter what promise they showed you in that one playoff game, being 22-0, that's certainly quite the leap.
It wasn't necessarily. That's just 85% of the roster was
for sure.
That's the main reason.
Yeah, but nevertheless, so yeah, they're 22-0. They just and they've kind of had their way with District 11 5A up to this point. First off, just the standings, just to get that out of the way. So Newman Smith is in first place. They are 8-0, and then in second place Highland Park 7-1. Third place Woodrow Wilson at 5-3. Creekview is in fourth place at 4-4, so those would be your 4 playoff teams if the postseason began today. And then you have a tie for 5th place, right on Creekview's heels at 3-5 sits Bryan Adams and Conrad, and then in 7th place R.L. Turner at 2-6, with Jefferson then at last place at 0-8. So Newman Smith, it's been quite the year. Obviously the best start in program history. They've already conquered what would at least appear to be on paper the biggest challenge in district, and that was the road game at Highland Park. They were able to win that game 74-66. They were up by 15 points after 3 quarters, so kind of business as usual for the Trojans. And it's now led to a position to where you get that out of the way, and now with 6 games left, it's on the table, the pursuit of perfection in the regular season, which would be certainly quite the nice feather in the cap for that program. It's obviously when you look at their dominance. It all starts with Jaron Cook, one of the top players in the Metroplex, committed to Sam Houston State.
That's where he went.
Mm-hmm. And he's
bigger than that.
A player who, head coach Percy Johnson has said, he's kind of got to, he's obviously an incredibly talented player, but sometimes, you gotta really push him to stand out at times. He's got kind of a very quiet, humble presence to him, and you've seen though, obviously he's had no trouble shining when it matters most for the Trojans. But then, the support that they get, it's a very, very deep team. That whether it's Damani Villaruel, who was their big man, of just an absolute force in the paint. Tebow Taggin at point guard. Just such a player who was lauded by Coach Johnson for just his basketball IQ, and basically sometimes Coach Johnson would joke, sometimes I have to ask him, hey, what do you think we should do in this specific moment or whatnot. He has that much faith in Tebow's on-court IQ and decision making. And then just the contributions from there, in that game against Highland Park, their leading scorer was actually AJ Barjona, who had 21 points in that. So that just shows you, again, if it's not one, then they're going to get contributions from somebody, and it's it's led to a really, really encouraging regular season. You're wondering now, kind of big picture, what is it going to mean come playoff time? Assuming they are able to, to keep this pursuit of perfection going, and they do lock down that top seed out of 11-5A. When you look at, kind of the way that Region 2 5A bracket might be starting to kind of round into form, and it looks like, at least right now, that the bulk of the power in that region is going to be on the half where Newman Smith would reside. Now that half does not include Lancaster. Lancaster is most likely going to be on the bottom half of that bracket, meaning that a theoretical matchup between Lancaster and Newman Smith will not happen until the regional finals. Which, I mean, if Newman Smith is able to get hot in the playoffs, carry this momentum over, and go 5 rounds deep, that would be the best run in program history. They've only been to the third round 2 times in their history. The last time was back in 2006. So and I think based on what they've done this season, that's kind of the expectation at this point, is that you got to keep this thing going now and make some history in the playoffs. But to get there, though, it's likely going to require you look at potentially seeing one of the Frisco schools in the second round, or drawing perhaps a South Oak Cliff or a Kimball in the third round, maybe a Sulphur Springs in the fourth round, all of whom are ranked in the top 11-12 teams in the state according to the TABC rankings. So if Newman Smith is going to make some headway in the postseason and get to the regional finals, they're going to earn every last bit of it, because the level of competition will certainly ramp up in the playoffs, and probably pretty quickly for them. But yes, they've looked the part right now. You have Creekview, which is 4-4 in fourth place, just hanging on to that last playoff spot. Yeah. Creekview, who is, they were able to withstand an 0-4 start to district. They took a rough loss to begin to R.L. Turner, and then lost games to the aforementioned the other playoff teams to kind of set them back. But they've since righted the ship with 4 straight wins, including a 1-point win on Tuesday over R.L. Turner, which that could very well be the difference between CFB ISD having 2 teams in the playoffs, and R.L. Turner now, who's been really, really close, but it's performances like that, though, that look like that's probably going to be the difference between them being left out. Creekview, though, the margin for error is still pretty slim. You've got just a 1-game lead on Bryan, Adams, and Conrad, so still plenty to go. But at the very least, though, it's CFB ISD is in position, though, to get 2 teams into the playoffs, including one that could potentially make it all the way to the regional tournament, which is, again, that'd be very uncharted waters for that school district as a whole. But it's been quite the story over at Newman Smith, and having just a season for the ages for that program. Let's see, then we can talk a little bit of 10-5A now. Talk a little McKinney North, a little Lovejoy over in that district, which I'm kind of getting a vibe. It's kind of similar to the girls district in that you really there's really no guaranteed. We're just gonna go out and just beat this team, because you had, what was it, on Tuesday? The last place team in the district, Denison, beat the first place team, McKinney North, by 11.
Crazy.
So right now you have up to this point.
They're not going to beat Frisco ISD playing like that.
I put no bets out there this year. He still hadn't paid up, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's see. So as of right now in 10-5A, you've got a 3-way tie for first place, which I believe last week when we did the girls in mid-district look at this at 10-5A, it was also a 3-way tie for first place. You have McKinney North, Lovejoy, and Princeton, who are at 3-1, and then you have a 3-way tie for fourth place at 1-3 between Wiley East, Sherman, and Denison. So, Kendrick, Tuesday showed, man, anybody can be beat in this district.
True, but there's 2 things. One, North, if they beat Princeton on Friday, they'll have all the tiebreakers. So it's like they're tied, but they got, they already beat Lovejoy and they beat Princeton. And then 2, they had a 15-game district winning streak, so they were due to lose a district game. So it's kind of like law averages, as they say.
Kind of like Saxon.
With McKinney North, though, I don't know, what is this team kind of meeting expectations just from your vantage point, or what are you kind of seeing on there?
They've been really adjusting without playing with, because this team was built around Brandon Frazier last year, who was the big guy. Who was the difference in that game against, which is kind of crazy, the last time Newman Smith lost was because Brandon Frazier had a double-double, 3 dunks, 18 points, and 12 rebounds in the second round of the playoffs last year. They don't got that go-to guy this year that can just throw down and just dictate the pace. So they have a committee, and evidently just had a bad night last week. They're a team that can get hot, beat you. They're not going to beat themselves. Coach Kraft does a good job they play very fundamental sound, but they have to play at a certain pace for them to beat you. They can't just get up and down, or they can't just go off and we got to score 70 and beat you like when you play in Lancaster. They play a very controlled tempo.
They've had it's a nice little spirited scrap between them and Lovejoy, at least these 2 meetings, the one back in tournament season and then this one recently in district play, 44-41 in favor of the Bulldogs, albeit a game that required overtime. So, it shows you that just the margin between these 2 teams is not that. There's not much separating them. I think the game back in tournament season was decided by 4 or 5 points. So, the Leopards and the Bulldogs Bulldogs are looking.
It's open for grabs. I still think North has the inside track, but it's definitely open for grabs.
They've got the leg up as far as just that head-to-head victory now. And you mentioned, kind of that, not having that one presence to replace Brandon Frazier. Well, it was the other Frazier who was kind of the instrumental piece in helping them get some distance on Lovejoy, as I believe Dylan Frazier led all scorers in that win. Too. But then, Lovejoy, turns around and they respond to that, though, with, their highest scoring performance of the entire season when they hung 73 points on Wiley East in a 29-point victory. They got big games from Jared Langs, Josh Kirkland, Carson Holden, who's been really, really steady for them during district play. It's right now it's just you're looking at February 11th and circling that rematch against McKinney North when North comes over to Lovejoy and seeing if they can draw even, and maybe the third time's the charm, and seeing if they can finally get a win on the Bulldogs and maybe create a bit of a log jam up top in that district. Then let's see, over in 9-5A, the All Frisco district. Let's see, we've got 12 games on the docket already in that district. And right now, as your standings go, you have a tie for first place between Independence and Centennial. In third place is Wakeland at 8-4, and then a three-way tie for fourth place between Memorial, Frisco, and Liberty at 7-5. Lone Star's in seventh place at 5-7. Reedy in eighth at 4-8. Heritage in 9th place at 3-9, and Lebanon Trail 1-11 in 10th. Where do you want to start, Brian? Whether it's the tie at the top or that log jam there for that last playoff spot, man, because it's certainly plenty of fun happenings over in Frisco.
So this team was dead in the water not even 4 weeks ago, and now they might be the hottest. They are the hottest team. They might be the best team right now in Frisco ISD, and that's Liberty. They're 7-5. They've won 7 in a row. They just knocked off Memorial, who was probably the second hottest team in the district at the time, Tuesday, and they held on for a 64-60 win. They were up by double digits most of that game. They hit 6 threes in the first half. They just caught fire. Makai Abi, he wearing number 24, a big Kobe fan, and he put the team on his back, had 20 points in that game. Then he had a lot of help from his role players. There's a stud freshman, Trenton Walters, starting point guard. And he was huge in that game. Just breaking Memorial's press. Memorial's such a big team lengthwise, and they can really impose problems for teams in half court traps and whatnot. And Walters was huge. His older brother Trey Walters, he hit some big threes also in that game. Myson Huff, he was huge, a senior guard. It's a totally different team from the team we saw in November and December. They're not quite looking like the district champion that they were the last 2 years, but they're definitely a playoff team at this moment in time. It just so happens they start off the season 0-5, and so that kind of set them behind. So they're tied right there with, like I said, Memorial, who's had their fair share of injuries. Their star player's been out since the very first quarter of the season. If he plays, they very well could be, right there at first place in this district. But then they're right there with Frisco, another team that it's hard to figure out. They'll knock off, one of the elite squads, like a Wakeland, and then they'll come back and lose to someone that they shouldn't lose to. And Lone Star, they've been playing spoiler a little bit the last few weeks as well. They look like they were dead in the water, also kind of like Liberty, and they've kind of crept back in there into the mix. I don't think they'll make the playoffs. They're 5-7. They've fallen too far behind, and there's just too much madness going on in the first 6 spots to make things real interesting. But another team in Wakeland who looked like for a second there for a few game stretch they were the district favorites. I know we talked about it a few weeks ago. They've dropped 3 or 4, but luckily for them, they had such a hot start. They're 8-4, and they're still in that mix. But Centennial, they've strung together back-to-back wins. A guy to look out for down the stretch is Xavier Savage, who had over 50 points in 2 games in a 2-game stretch earlier this year. He dropped 30-something. I forget who it was against. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but he's been a key player for them. They're a senior-heavy group. Majority of their starting lineup is seniors. That always helps in any sport, really, especially in a district with a lot of the star players are younger. Look at Memorial. But yeah, so they're in the mix now at 9-3, and Independence they've held tight, and they've remained at the top of the district, and they've kind of been a surprise team. They play Liberty tomorrow night, and which should be a good one. And then Liberty has to go around and play Centennial. So 2 teams that beat them in that first go around. So these will be the real test now coming up for Liberty, who's won 7 in a row. See if they can knock off an Independence, and then if they can win one of those games coming up against Independence and Centennial, things will get very, very interesting with just about a half a dozen games or so left to play.
So do you get a sense at this point that is there a front runner for the district title?
No,
or is it still
I'm kind of glad you asked me that because I have no clue. A couple weeks ago I thought maybe the front runner would be Wakeland. I thought Memorial, if they would have beaten Liberty Tuesday night, that would have put them at 8-4, and that would have put them tied with Wakeland, just 1 game back of Independence and Centennial. And I like the way Memorial had been playing as of late, but a lot of their youth and some inexperience is showing a little bit. Majority of their star players are freshmen and sophomores and juniors. Give them another year, like I've been saying, and they'll be the district favorite, potentially next year, but. I don't know. Centennial has really surprised me the last few weeks. I thought maybe they would have, kind of regressed a little bit and kind of fallen back to the pack. But they're right there tied with Independence at 9-3. If I had to pick, the district favorite right now is Independence. They've been the most consistent, but anything can happen with 6 games left.
Nevertheless, though, it is a completely different landscape, though, than we're used to in that Frisco district, and I think you're seeing the same thing in our last 5A district. 8-5A, man, in just 1 year's time, how much has this district changed? There was last year you had, R.J. Hampton and Avery Anderson and Sammy Freeman.
That feels like ages ago, doesn't it?
I know.
It feels like 5-6 years ago or something.
It's a new day in District 8-5A boys basketball, one that currently is being ruled by Denton ISD. You have Braswell in first place at the midpoint at 6-1, followed by Denton Ryan at 5-2. Then you have a tie for third place between Justin Northwest and the Colony at 4-3. Little Elm is just one rung outside the playoff picture there in fifth place at 2-4. Denton in sixth place at 2-5, and then Lake Dallas in seventh at 1-6. So with Little Elm, obviously no team. It's fair to say maybe no team in the state underwent a bigger identity change since last season than Little Elm. When you lose, the best player in program history, a future NBA pro, to the overseas ranks, and now as Little Elm has tried to soldier on in the post R.J. Hampton era. What do you kind of get? What's the vibe you get around Little Elm, and just kind of how are you feeling as they look to claw their way into the playoff mix?
And one game they're hanging on and beating Justin Northwest by 1. And then they're losing to Denton, and then they're blowing a lead and falling apart against the Colony, a team that had been struggling, who's I'm sure we'll talk about here in a couple minutes, but they're red hot now, and they look like they're for sure playoff team. When it looked like, hey, the Colony might not make the playoffs this year, but they're
up and down year for the Colony in district play.
Yeah, and then you look at Little Elm, a team that beat North Crowley earlier this year, and they beat Madison in week 1, and then in the very first game of the year, and then they lose games that they should not lose. They beat Wakeland earlier this year in tournament play. It's a team you can't figure out. And Coach Dominic Parker, he'll say it, he'll admit it. They're inconsistent. They're up and down, and that's and this is a team with a lot of experience too. A lot of their star players and go-to guys are having to play much bigger roles this year. Keith Smith. Probably their best player, their go-to scorer right now. He's filled in a much bigger role, and he's excelled, but it's a much different role than he's been the last few years when he has R.J. Hampton and has Brandon Cross, he has Javian Williams, all these guys, and now he's having to step up and be the guy. And then all these guys that didn't really play last year, the guys that were into the bench, guys last year, they're having to play. Some JV guys, Altavius Hobbs, a sophomore, he's been phenomenal at times, but he's just a sophomore. Brian Hunter has come in, and he's been a force. Christian Mirage is one of those seniors that's had to come in and really play heavy minutes, and it's just. That's what you're going to get. You're going to get some inconsistency, and they're going to have to. They have 2 must-win games coming up, and it's their next 2. It's Lake Dallas and Denton. They can't lose to Denton again. If they lose to Denton again, I don't see them making the playoffs. Do I think they'll beat Lake Dallas tomorrow night? Sure, of course, they should. But they should. They beat them the first go around, but then they have Denton, and then they have Denton Ryan. A team that's kind of been a surprise. The biggest surprise, I think, at least in 8-5A. They face them next Friday. So 3, Lake Dallas must win, and then 2 interesting games against Denton ISD.
Well, like you talk about Little Elm being a tough team to figure out. Like, what do you make of a team like Justin Northwest, which is they've beat each of the 3 playoff teams, so they have a win. They're the only team that's beaten Braswell. They've got a win. They just picked up a win on Tuesday over Denton Ryan, and then they beat the Colony in the first go around. But then they have losses to Little Elm and Lake Dallas on their resume. That's the only team that Lake Dallas has beaten in district. Is Justin Northwest.
That makes no sense. It makes zero sense.
It's like it makes no sense for Denison to be.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
It's one of those districts that you're learning, though. It does feel like you have some separation, though, as far as those top 4 teams from the bottom 3. But at the same time, nothing is coming easy for any of those top 4 teams because those bottom 3 are very, very lively, and it obviously can play spoiler if need be. With the Colony, who was, I think they were the preseason favorite to win this district coming in, and it's been and they had a really, really encouraging preseason to the point where I think we picked them to win the district, and really without much hesitation. It's been a bit of a bumpy road for them. I mean, they start off the district in encouraging fashion. They blow out Denton by 24 points, and then over their next 6 games, they've been outscored 347 to 343. So that tells you all you need to know right there. They're 3-3 over that stretch. They had a 3-game losing streak, all to the other 3 playoff teams, and then they were able to rebound, get wins over Little Elm, Lake Dallas, and then they scraped out a 2-pointer over Denton on Tuesday. Again, just showing the margin for error in this district. With the Colony, it's the loss of Sean Matthews kind of impacted the backcourt, as we're kind of seeing. Keith Miller, and Tay Mosier had really formed a nice little 1-2-3 punch for the Cougars. Nevertheless, so Miller and Mosier have been still very, very strong, though, in his absence. And then you've had a player like Caden Sclafani, who's really, really stepped up big. He was their leading scorer in that game on Tuesday against Denton, scoring 21 points in a 2-point victory. Can they just get some consistency going, though? I mean, we'll find out now because these next 3 games, starting from Friday through next week, they play Ryan on Friday, Northwest on Tuesday, and then Braswell on Friday. If you get 1 win there, that should be enough to for sure lock down a playoff spot. But obviously, as we've seen, nothing is coming easy for the Cougars.
In most of these games, and especially down the last few, they've had the 2 most athletic guys on the court at any given time. Obviously, Keith Miller, when I saw him play against Little Elm, he had 28 points, and he was just so much bigger and faster and stronger. And he put
see him on the football field, man. He's a force.
He is. He put up a lot of shots that game, but he scored a lot of points too. And then you throw in Miles Price, who's kind of been their 6th man.
I like that they've done like Miles Price is now making like really big plays on the basketball court. I had no idea.
He's not like filling up the stat sheet, but he's just getting that rebound, getting that stop, hitting timely free throws.
He's out athleting.
Yes. The classic, just better athletic football player on the court.
Goes a long way at that level.
For sure.
And then you got a team like Lake Dallas, which I thought there was a chance Lake Dallas might be a little bit more frisky based on some of their preseason results. Hasn't panned out so far in the standings. They're 1-6, but they do have that win over the 3rd place team in the district, Justin Northwest. They've shown flashes of brilliance in the sense that against but they've struggled with the bad quarter. Like Tuesday against Braswell, they were down 3 at the half. This is a 3-point game with the best team in the district, but then they got outscored 20-9 in the 3rd quarter, and they can't overcome it. And then the Friday before, it was the 2nd quarter that did them in against the Colony. And then earlier when they played Denton Ryan, 2nd place Denton Ryan, that was a 4-point game at the half. It's just the margin for error is just so slim for Lake Dallas because they just don't have the size that these other teams do. It's never been a program that traditionally boasts the 6'5", 6'6" interior presences that some of these other teams in the area have. They're a borderline 4A school for that reason.
Is it borderline?
Their enrollment is literally just a couple hundred or so above the cutoff. But nevertheless, they've shown the ability to execute though against a playoff caliber opponent like a Northwest. So again, there is the opportunity that they could be a fairly dangerous spoiler. They do have some pretty really potent outside threats. Be it Yash Matu, Jaden McGrew, Kobe Minor, stand out on the football field. He's again a lot of those hustle plays that a guy like Miles Price feeds off. Kobe Minor's very, very effective in that capacity. At the end of the day though, they are 3 games back of the Colony and just Northwest. So whereas the playoffs are likely out of the question for Lake Dallas, though, them, just like Denton, just like Little Elm, still shown they're capable of rising up against an upper echelon opponent if need be. Let's see, so that's a look at District 8 5A, kind of where things are at in there right now. That's a look at all of our 5A districts. We can quickly touch on some of the happenings, though, over in 4A, whether it's with Sunnyvale, whether it's with Celina, and then maybe talk a little bit of private school stuff as well. Let's see, Devin, what's happening over in Celina right now, over in boys basketball?
Sunnyvale is in the middle of the pack in that district. Caddo Mills, Crandall, Sunnyvale. They were picked to finish second in the preseason bowl. They're tied for third with Nevada Community. It's a Sunnyvale team that I like. They have a good mentality because a lot of them, with the smaller you get, the more these guys play multiple sports, and so a lot of these guys are football players who are used to experiencing success on the football field. And I think that mentality does carry over to a certain degree. Now, you still have to have the talent and the ability to win. I think Sunnyvale will make the playoffs. And if you look at their kind of sub-regional of those four districts in 4A Division II, there's only one ranked team out of those four districts, and that's Paris at number 22. So I think anybody who makes the playoffs, whether it be out of this district or any of the others, are kind of thinking, hey, if we can just get in, it really doesn't matter what our seed is. We might be able to play a couple of rounds because, now once you get a little bit further, then you run into your Carters and your Lincolns and your Faith Families.
That's not going to go
and your Dunbars, and those are where you're looking at your top 10 state-ranked teams. But I think the focus right now, like I say, they're in the middle of the pack. They need to take care of business against teams like Quinlan Ford and whatnot. But make a push, see if they can finish it. You don't have to catch Caddo Mills for the district title. It's just a matter of being one of the four and then try to peak here over these next couple of weeks. And as, like I say, given their immediate playoff road, this is a Sunnyvale team that could go a couple of rounds. And this is not a Sunnyvale program on the boys' side that's used to having a lot of playoff success. So even if they were to get a playoff win or two, that would be huge for that program.
And then, Bryan, with Celina, you got a Celina team that's currently state ranked, currently number 19 in the latest TABC poll. So, obviously it helps when you have one of the better players in the entire Metroplex to lead the way. So just what's been the read on what Celina has shown so far?
They've been rolling. Yeah. No surprise. They're undefeated in district play. As you just mentioned, they're 19th in the state. Their biggest test, and I spoke to Coach Bobby Stastny this morning, actually, for a preview I'm working on. They play Melissa tomorrow night, and that's going to be their biggest challenge. That was their biggest challenge last year. They squeaked by in the second go-around and a win over them on the road last year en route to a second consecutive district title. And Coach Stastny told me, teams are coming after them. They're the back-to-back district champions. They were undefeated last year, 10-0, and they're just coming off of, who I thought was going to be the second best team in the district coming in before Melissa went on this hot run to start district. I thought it'd be Aubrey, and Celina blew them out by 18 points on Tuesday. And so I thought, okay, and Carson Stastny scored 23, Bryson Brown had 13, and that was without, one of their big men in Kobe Ellison, who's been ineligible the last few games. But he will be eligible as of 3:45 tomorrow afternoon, and he'll be back. And this is the same Celina team that missed Carson for 12 games throughout a stretch, and they were still winning a lot of games. They were still successful in the non-district and in the tournament play.
Do they need him?
Against Melissa and Aubrey, and then in the playoffs for sure. This is, obviously you want to win a district title. Obviously, 3 in a row would be, awesome, to close out Carson's career and all that. But you also want to get first to avoid a potential brutal first-round playoff matchup. Even last year, they faced Lincoln in the first round, and they were the district champions. And Lincoln was the fourth-place team in that district.
That's what I mentioned, though, with Sunnyvale avoiding that teams in that sub-regional. Celina is right in the heart of all those teams. I mentioned those top 10 teams.
They'll battlefield.
There's a good chance they could face one of those in the by-district round, and it's just not fair. But you really want this game, because if Celina beats Melissa, then they're really in the driver's seat for a district title and could potentially avoid one of those super mega elite teams in the first round.
Let's see, and then in the private school side of the boys basketball scene, we actually have a few teams that are state ranked. You've got over in 5A, you've got Dallas Christian, who's number 9 in 5A. You got Frisco Legacy Christian, number 4. We can get to those two in a second. I want to obviously chime in though on the number 1 ranked team over in 6A, and that is just the well-oiled machine, the unstoppable juggernaut known as John Paul II. 32-1 are the Cardinals at this juncture of the season. They have a chance to clinch a district championship on Friday. They have won 25 consecutive games. They're undefeated in the district and have not really met much resistance. I was anxious to see, with some of the job that they did winning these tournaments against some 6A programs, how that would translate over into district play against the Lynches and the Prestonwoods and whatnot. And haven't broken a sweat, really. I mean, the average margin of victory has been almost 28 points per game. And, I mean, their closest game was a 12-point win over Bishop Lynch in their district opener. They rematched Lynch on Tuesday, and then they beat them by 24. I mean, they've scored at least 70 points in every district game. You've got Jalen Tyson, who's setting and breaking his own single-game scoring records for the program. I mean, it's I just haven't seen a team yet this season that is just so adept at making you pay for your misses, quite like this John Paul team. I mean, it's a team that there's teams that the eye test is kind of a key player. You look at them, just warming up, and like, oh my God, that team is about to just unleash just all sorts of just hell on the opponents. John Paul fits the bill. I mean, they've got just a combination of just size and length and athleticism that runs 7-8 deep. I mean, it's
they must see.
Yeah, you mix that in, and I mean, and it's a team that really is in a comfort zone when they're able to get out and transition. And a lot of that stems from their defense. They play some really tight pressure on defense, really put that length and athleticism to use, generate turnovers, and then get out in the open court. And that's where, again, there's just no team in that TAPS district that's shown the ability to match them stride for stride. Maybe there's a team out there that can have some success slowing the game down, maybe making it more of a half-court style tempo for them. But so far, I mean, they've passed every test so far with flying colors. I mean,
it's them and everybody else.
It's feeling like it. And I mean, I've seen this before because I mean, plenty of Prestonwood teams over the years have been in this similar position with some of the great teams they had with the Julius Randle teams back in the late 2000s and the early 2010s. Then the Snyder Herard teams that immediately came after those. Prestonwood has been all too accustomed with having a team that just whether it was just from a physical standpoint or just a talent standpoint, would overwhelm teams. And this John Paul team is it kind of fits the bill. I mean, it is crazy to think that when you look at this team, they have 3 of their starting 5 are 6'4", but then they have 2-3 more off the bench that are just as big. And so it's you can try to we're going to try to attack one guy, get him in foul trouble, and then it's going to kind of cut the head off the snake, so to speak. No, because then you roll in off their bench, they have a guy like Alex Zambi who he would be the best player on Plano West right now if he was playing over there. Still, he's comes off the bench for them. Wow. Cameron Corin, who's a 6'9" big man, just a sophomore, he'd probably have a rotational spot with Allen right now if he was still there. And that's these are their reserves. Their starting 5 is airtight. Whether it's Jalen Tyson, who's got to be at the forefront of the MVP conversation in all of TAPS. The Tot brothers, their dynamic backcourt of Jalen and Jawan Tot. Nathan Dominic, former standout at Plano senior, just a jack of all trades kid, who's obviously been a huge shot in the arm for them. And then Donovan Johnson, a tight end on the football team. He was a starter last year for the team that made it to the state semifinals. He's given them some nice, some big man minutes, some nice blocks, rebounds, and whatnot. I mean, it's theirs for the taking. Getting that the first state championship in program history. It is theirs for the taking, and I'm curious to see what happens though when you get to the playoffs, when they start seeing some of these other teams from the Houston area, San Antonio and whatnot, and if there is any resistance from an Antonian Prep or a Midland Christian or a Houston St. Thomas. Because as far as the Dallas area goes, they're unmatched right now, and it's 32-1. It doesn't lie. They have looked the part as the best team going right now over in TAPS 6A. How about us over in 5A, guys, whether it's Dallas Christian or Frisco Legacy Christian? What have you guys seen over there, and just what is the chance that either of those teams might make some headway come postseason time?
It's so hard to gauge these teams in the private school ranks because there's so many different avenues you can take. They're so spread out, number one. So certain teams, like in the Dallas area, you have so many good programs around that you can play on a consistent basis where you can't say that about some of the other teams that you'll see. Some teams choose to challenge themselves. Dallas Christian, you look at their record, 18-10. Have they stayed with just 5A schools? So they, buffed up with 4A and 3A? They play John Paul. Dallas Christian in all sports traditionally will play the best teams in this area. So you look at their record compared to others, it's kind of hard to gauge just on that. So you have to basically look at head-to-head results. And Dallas Christian, like I said, they check in at number 9. They're in the same district as Bullard Brook Hill, who's number 5, and they lost to Brook Hill by 15 earlier. Grapevine Faith checks in at number 3. They lost a close game to Grapevine Faith, and then Fort Worth Christian checks in at number 10. Again, they lost by 1 point in overtime. So they're 0-3 against common 5A state-ranked opponents, but they've been good games. And like I mentioned the John Paul game, only to say that they tested themselves. They tried to measure themselves up against what's arguably the best team in the state. And so, but it's so hard to tell during the regular season. I mean, Dallas Christian will make the playoffs, but then you forecast a potential second round matchup with a Westbury Christian or it's just it's so hard to compare the two because they don't see each other. But they put themselves in a position. That's all you can ask for them. They just kind of cover them from afar. They've had several different guys. They're another one of those teams that kind of have a leading scorer, leading two scorers, different one every night. So I think that bodes well from a depth standpoint. But we'll see what happens. I don't think, unlike having John Paul as clearly the number one, it doesn't appear that 5A has that, so to speak.
With Frisco Legacy Christian, Bryan, we can round out the podcast talking about them. It was a team that popped onto my radar with their impressive showing at the Allen In and Out tournament during the holidays. How have the Eagles kind of built off of that right now?
Unlike last year, they dropped a district game, but it was to Grapevine Faith. Yeah. It was only by 3, and some dude on Grapevine Faith dropped 39 points. So that's just a testament to some dude on Grapevine Faith. Never seen them play. So, but anyways, he dropped 39. So when a dude drops 39, chances are you might lose that game. But then they turn around and on Tuesday they beat Grapevine Faith by 20. And they also have a 30-plus point victory over Fort Worth Christian already. These are the defending state champions in 5A in Legacy Christian. They've been battle tested. They returned a lot of their roster. Jonathan Alexander, their big man, 6'5". He can do it all. And he's playing very well. The one time I actually did get to see them play so far this year in person was against Prince of Peace on New Year's Eve, and they didn't play Jonathan that game. So I was pretty upset, but they still beat Prince of Peace pretty handily. But last year they went through some hiccups. Late. They won an overtime game last year before the end of the district season against Fort Worth Christian by 1. And then they lost to Grace Prep right before the playoffs. So I wouldn't be alarmed that they lost to Grapevine Faith. I mean, they're the number 3 team in the state right now. So and they've got to play them twice in the last couple weeks. So that's going to be big for them going into the playoffs, and they're a top 5 team for a reason, and I wouldn't be surprised if they make another run at state.
Alrighty, well, guess what, guys? That'll wrap it up for this episode of the podcast, as we have touched on 6A, 5A, 4A, a little bit of private school as well, as we now enter the home stretch of boys basketball season in our coverage area. So yeah, that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. We'll be back next week with some realignment talk, guys. It is almost here, almost time for all realignment. So yes, that'll obviously be a very, very dominant storyline for next week's podcast. And yeah, folks, until then, you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.